short reading, 5 minutes?
Please.
So, okay. And I decided, because it's short, there's a bit in here about an important friend of Candy's named Jeremiah Newton.
Yeah.
And this is how they met. Jeremiah Newton met Candy in the summer of '66. He was about to start his last year of high school. He'd figured out that he was gay, but hadn't acted on it. One day, while reading a magazine he enjoyed called Vice Squad, he came upon a story headlined, "Boy Brothel Raided in Nefarious West Village." He decided then that he'd like to find this village. He took the subway from Queens to 42nd Street and stood there until he saw this, quote, "very swishy young boy about my age." Jeremiah followed him onto the subway and got out where he did. He ended up on Greenwich Avenue, then the gay Mecca. He scrunched down in a doorway and watched as 3 women came walking down Greenwich arm in arm like a small chorus line. 2 of them were quite beautiful in black cocktail dresses and heels. The third he thought odd-looking, an albino in capri pants with blonde hair, quote, hepatitis yellow and coarse as a Brillo pad. They said hello to him and walked by. A couple of minutes later, they were back, dropping a set of keys in his lap. "Ma'am, you dropped your keys," he said. One of the beauties, who turned out to be Candy Darling, replied, "It's time for the young man to join the ladies." So he walked arm in arm with Candy and Holly and the albino woman, Porky, down Greenwich to 8th Street and into the Marlton Hotel, then a cheap boho dive. Lenny Bruce had stayed there while on trial for obscenity, and Jack Kerouac wrote The Subterranean's Anne Tristessa in one of its shabby rooms. The proprietor, Molly Marlton, sat on a high chair near the elevator in what looked to Jeremiah like a batter's cage out of Coney Island. She had no legs and usually wore prostheses, but it was a hot day. She'd taken them off. When she saw Jeremiah walked in with Candy and company, she started screaming, "You're not taking that kid upstairs with you, are you crazy?" Candy turned to her and said, "Why don't you get up and do something about it?" The 4 of them stepped into the elevator. Upstairs, they walked down a long hallway. Jeremiah remembered that all the doors seemed to be open and people were talking and flitting about. "We went into the last room where there was a big bed with a naked couple on it, shooting up heroin," he said. "I had never seen a naked woman before, let alone a naked man and a naked woman in a bed. I was stunned." Candy and Holly walked back out, leaving Jeremiah there with Porky, who sidled up to him and said, "You know those 2? They're not really women, they're guys. I'm a real woman." Jeremiah shrieked and ran back to the elevator. Downstairs, Molly Marlton was still strapping on her legs. Just a little bit more. A month or so after meeting Candy, Jeremiah was back in the village and he saw Candy on the street. She approached and said, "Why did you leave so quickly?" Jeremiah asked, "Is it true? Are you really a guy?" "What do I look like to you, a guy?" "No," he admitted, "you look like a woman. If I look like one, why can't I be one?" Jeremiah thought she resembled Audrey Hepburn, even in male drag. She had brown hair and she'd wear light makeup. Her eyes were always done. Candy said, "I'd like to be your friend." Sometimes Jeremiah would run into Candy at the 10th of Always, a gay after-hours club on 3rd Street where a certain number of transgender people were allowed if they looked good, and where Warhol sometimes went with Lou Reed. Jeremiah even stayed in touch with her during his 1.5 years at college, but he added, "I didn't like the lives that transgender people lived back then. They lived in squalor. They couldn't get jobs. They couldn't get an apartment. They couldn't get anything. They didn't know where their next dollar was coming from, and they had to prostitute themselves. And I didn't want to be too close to any of them. Candy frightened me, honestly. I didn't know what she wanted from me."
All right, I'm really glad you read that because I have a question about Jeremiah. Jeremiah was actually instrumental in this book. How did you 2 connect and under what circumstances, and were you both dressed?
We actually didn't meet. We both showed up at the Acker Awards done by Clayton Patterson every year to celebrate those still keeping the boho spirit alive in the East Village, Lower East Side. And he won an award for his documentary called Beautiful Darling. And I won for my previous book called Fire in the Belly, biography of David Wojnarowicz. He got my number from Clayton and called me the next day and said, I don't know who you are, but when I saw you on the stage, I thought you were the person who should write the Candy biography. And I wasn't sure if I was right for that, but I went over to his house on Avenue C and talked with him, and he showed me that he had some of her journals and photos and letters and things that I hadn't, like pictures I hadn't seen before, and that was something, because a lot of pictures of her out there. But then what really got to me was the stories about her life and the struggles she faced, because I didn't know that much about her, but I knew she was this incredibly beautiful woman and glamorous person and knew Warhol and whatever. But what he said was that, that was her life in Manhattan, where she was acclaimed, and then she'd go home to Massapequa Park, and her mother would say, don't come home till it's dark, don't let anyone see you, don't answer the door. And I thought, oh my God. I mean, so that right there is this disparity between, how she was treated, and it said a lot to me about how transgender people were treated at that point, and I thought, that's a story that's really worth telling. And I didn't know it was going to take me 10 years, but he ended up being my main informant then, because I didn't even add up how many interviews I did with him. And I went through, searching through boxes in his house to find other material on Candy. And he was very important. And the main incredible thing he did, he gave me all these interview tapes he had done back in the 70s, because he was going to write her biography. And so he interviewed all these people back in the 70s. She died in 74. So then he started interviewing, and most of those people were dead by the time he asked me to do this. So he just gave me all the tapes. And what the information on there was just incredibly valuable, because I wouldn't have had no access to that information. And it was people like Candy's mother, and the woman who ran the beauty school that Candy went to after she dropped out of high school. She went to a beauty school. That woman was important in her early development. And Jeremiah had all these interviews with them. And so he interviewed off-Broadway directors she'd worked with. And even a little, I wish it was longer, a brief interview with Jackie Curtis, things like that. So that was, he just handed them over and I transcribed them. And and they're really a big part of it, especially the beginning of this book. So it relies on that information. So.
Thank you. 10 years.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yes.
I know that writers write themselves. I write memoir, so I get to lie. You can't lie at all. You're a biographer. You can't lie. But you wrote so beautifully about Candy's childhood, and I'm wondering, where did you connect with that? You saw something in yourself and of yourself in there.
Yeah, well, her childhood, as we would expect, was very tortured, and she couldn't wait to get out of. She referred to school as the sneak pit, and couldn't wait to get out of there. The thing that I feel like I admire about her is that she went through all of that stuff, managed to drop out of school, because of course her parents had split up and neither one of them wanted her to leave school, but she managed to get out. She even at the end, she had figured out a way to, she did these things that were so creative as ways to get out of school. She drew with pen, drew a wound onto her leg. I said, Mom, I'm wounded. I can't go to school. And her mother actually believed it and let her stay home. So it was doing things like that. And then at one point, she crawled up, she got up into a crawl space up somewhere in between her brother's bedroom and her half-brother's bedroom and the attic. and would stay there all night. When her mother and the half-brother were home, she would be up there. And then when they'd leave for work and school, she'd come down and watch TV and eat something or whatever. But she managed to stay up there for, I think it was 3 days or something like that, until she made a noise and the brother heard her up there. But that's how desperate she was to get out of school. And but then, and she was, there was a story, and she never talked about her childhood, so I had to find this out from other people, like little puzzle pieces here and there. But one off-Broadway playwright talked to her and said that she talked about going to school, and the kids on the school bus would throw things at her, and she didn't have friends there except a few girls. She was friends with a few girls at school, but otherwise no. And then, so she's, we have to remember this is like in the early 60s here, the 50s, and the thing I admire about her is that she decided, you have to accept me as I am. And she made that statement to the woman who was running the beauty school, where she had gone after, because that woman and her daughter they were both friends with Candy. And I feel like that the woman there in particular was like a substitute mother. And that was the first person that Candy ever spoke to about her gender dysphoria, was that woman running the beauty school. And that's who she said, you have to accept me as I am, or leave me alone. And that's pretty amazing for that period of time. I admired that. I mean, it's not like she had a lot of role models to follow, although, well, it's not like they had any connection, but who would move into a house in Massapequa, as opposed to Massapequa Park, but Christine Jorgensen.
Oh my God.
And Candy used to walk over there and stand in front of Christine's house, hoping to catch a glimpse, and she never did. But, meanwhile, Christine was going through, I think, a problem trying to marry someone and not being allowed to, or, things like that going on. And Christine Jorgensen, I read her memoir. It's very upbeat, but she really went through hell. As you can probably imagine, she went through hell back then. And but not that Candy knew anything about that, but she wanted a glimpse of this person, even as a kid. So, anyway.
You talk about Candy, and today pronouns are a huge deal. And in fact, when I found out about you were writing the book, as you called me, you wanted to have a conversation about pronouns. What were you confronted with, and how did you end up dealing with it?
Well, you were one of 10 people I talked to who were either in the trans community or very close to the trans community with lots of connections in that community. And what I basically I didn't get a consensus in a way. It was more like some people saying, what happened to me with the wrong name and the wrong gender is part of my life, and don't erase it. A few people did say that, but other people said no. The name I chose now is my name. Don't bring up any of the dead name at all. It's offensive. And so what I decided was, well, what would Candy want? And there was this interview I found in some offbeat gay paper that, believe me, has never been archived, but Jeremiah had a copy of it, and it was actually at the Warhol Museum in his papers, in his Candy papers that he gave him. So it was this interview with some young filmmaker who wanted to know, asked her at one point, what's your real name? And she wouldn't answer, and she said to him, what's real about a name? Which I thought was very clever. And she also said, the past doesn't matter. It only matters what's right now. And then another big clue to me was at the end of her life, when she was very sick and she knew that she was going to die, she talked to one person, Jane Friedman, who, thank God, Jeremiah interviewed her, and asked her to please do a legal change of my name. I do not want the old name on my headstone. And So I think that's pretty positive proof that Candy wanted to be Candy. So what I decided was I'm calling her Candy all the way through. And these other people at the beginning, I can't rewrite them to not say him or my brother or, whatever. I mean, but to me it sort of illustrates the confusion around her, the fact of who she was compared to how she was perceived and what she had to deal with. So, in the first chapter you'll see some references to him, but I call her all the way through. So that's how I hope it's a satisfactory resolution.
It was so satisfactory. The reads, it's a wonderful read.
Oh, thank you.
Cover to cover.
Thank you.
Yeah. You mentioned that she was in touch with an off-Broadway playwright. She was in touch with some biggie playwrights as well. Was it Tennessee Williams?
Oh yeah, Tennessee Williams. She was in one Tennessee Williams play.
Come on.
Small Craft Warnings, it was called.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and she came in as a substitute because, they kind of used her as a publicity ploy because they thought, the play was not doing well. And so they said, well, let's bring in Candy Darling because she has this reputation and she's glamorous and then her fans will come and we'll get some more people to come. And and they had already moved the play from, it was on West 4th Street, I guess the Truck and Warehouse used to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And so they moved it up into Midtown near what's, near that Bloomingdale's or something around there. And so she came in to be there on her first day and went into the women's dressing room. And there was one other woman in the play named Helena Carroll. And she said, "Get it out of here. Get it out of here," screaming for the stage manager. So Candy just sort of laughed. She didn't want people to see anything happening to her, like any vulnerability. She didn't want people to see that. She would just smile and say, like big deal, and she left with her stuff. And they had to find another place for her because Tennessee Williams himself went into the men's dressing room and said, "Okay, can Candy come in here?" And there were like 5 guys or 4 or 5 guys, and they said, "No, there's no room. No, there's." So they found a closet, fittingly enough, for her, like a broom closet / storage space, and they put her in there and gave her like a table with a mirror, and so she was in there, and she put a star on the door. So that was, that's so great. And Tennessee Williams used to go in there and sit with her. And later said, and she's in his memoirs, because he wrote it while this was going on. And he wrote in the memoirs, "She's becoming my closest friend in the cast. She's the one I'm closest to," and he would take her out to dinner after the show, and so he was very kind to her, and he hated what these other people were doing. I think he was sort of disgusted by it, that they wouldn't let her into their rooms. It was never an issue when she was off Broadway. It wasn't an issue then, but where probably there was one dressing room for everybody. So, but anyway, yeah, Tennessee, and according to people I spoke to who've seen that play, she did really well. And he thought she did well. Jeremiah did interview him. It was a very brief interview, but he said that she did a good job, in that part. And Tennessee Williams thought she did well. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
You've got so many great stories. Reading them, it's not like a long, rambling something. No, you've got story after story after story.
Right, yeah.
You must have been told some pretty unreliable stories.
Yes,
tell me about
in
those.
fact, I do mention that in the book, that I do have some unreliable narrators. And as I say, all of them so delightful, but unreliable. And I had to face the fact that being accurate is my job. It isn't up to Hollywood Lawn to be accurate. But I have to be accurate if at all possible. Or Jackie Curtis, people who were unreliable. Another friend of hers named Paul Ambrose. They were just they were having fun telling me these great stories, So, like, in fact, Holly told me that there was this play called Vain Victory, very important in Candy's career, and it was written by Jackie Curtis. But it kept reappearing. It was done in like at least 3, maybe 4 different iterations of this play. It started at La Mama and went to WPA, and then another kind of shabby theater on West 4th Street. And at that point, Holly joined the cast, and Candy left. They had already been through months of work on this. And so Holly always told the story that now she was the mermaid in a wheelchair, which, Bette Midler, hello. But, this is where she got the idea. I mean, in the second version of Vain Victory, Candy plays a mermaid in a wheelchair, and who falls in love with the Jackie Curtis character, so she needs a leg transplant. So, and that's part of the play. I asked one of the people who was in the cast and still around, Augusto Machado, and he was supposedly the character who did the leg transplant. He couldn't quite remember how it happened, but anyway, Paul Ambrose ended up in the wheelchair, and so this wheelchair thing was a big part of the show, and so then when it got to the third theater, Holly Woodlawn always told the story of how I was in the wheelchair, and on the first night, we went over the footlights and crashed into the front row in my wheelchair, and that's where Candy was sitting, and I landed in her lap, and so I thought, it's even in that Craig Heiberger book where he did all the interviews with people who knew Jackie. And I asked Augusto, and Augusto said, well, when we were moving the sets from the second theater to the third, the second theater was on the Bowery, and we left that wheelchair out there for a couple minutes, and it was stolen. So there was no wheelchair by the time they got to the theater. She just made it all up. Because it's a great story,
Oh, that's great.
So, but I think I still kept in that she said that. I mean, it's just it's too great a story to leave out. And I think I've made it clear that it did not happen. I put in Augusto's quote, not really happening. But yeah, so yes. But there are all that vivid scene that she was part of downtown. It was it's gone. But it was a great thing to be part of for that time.
You draw it so well.
Oh.
You draw it so very, very well.
Well, thank
You've
you.
referred to Holly Woodlawn and Jackie Curtis and Andy Warhol. How did Candy get in with those folks? And is there a story there about anything?
Well, she met Holly first. They met on the street out on where all these gay people used to stand around. It was at the corner of 6th Avenue and Bleecker. And something was happening that day with Candy was having some kind of confrontation with one of the hustlers who was there. And like she was being kind of snotty to him, and he pushed an ice cream cone into her face or something like that. I can't remember the words, I have to look it up, but Holly was there and sort of intervened, and then gradually got to know Candy, and even went out to Massapequa Park with her a few times, and they would sew. They would make dresses out there at her mother's sewing machine. And so they got to know each other, and then the evening when half of America was tuned to Color Me Barbara, Candy and Holly went to a guy's house named Seymour Levy who lived on Bleecker Street, and Jackie showed up at that for the screening because he wanted to see it. I guess they didn't have a TV, or maybe they didn't have a color TV, whatever it was. So that's when Candy met Jackie, and then started to know him a bit more, and would see him around. And with Warhol, it was he came to one of her plays, the very first play that she did that Jackie wrote. It was called Glamour, Glory, and Gold. And Warhol even gave them a blurb to use on the ads, which went, "For the first time, I wasn't bored." So they had that quote, Andy Warhol. So, so he saw that, but then the real turning point was the next play that she was in that theater, written by Tom Eyen, called Give My Regards to Off Broadway. And she apparently did a fantastic job. Tom Eyen thought she was perfect for that part. And I think Warhol may have seen it, but who did see it for sure is Paul Morrissey, because he then directed Flesh. And he called, or they had to call Jackie to find out where she was. I mean, she never had a place to live, so she was always floating around. And he called Jackie Curtis and said, how can I reach Candy? And oh, by the way, you can come too, if you want to be in the movie. So they're both in Flesh, in that one scene, just that one scene in Flesh. But then after that, I mean, at that point, Warhol was in the hospital. He'd been shot by Valerie Solanas at that point. So he didn't, Morrissey directed that. And, but then she started coming to the factory, and Warhol really liked her, so as they got to know each other, Warhol thought that she was, she was glamorous, she was beautiful, she was polite, she was witty, and for him that was perfect arm candy to take to openings and parties at socialites' houses and things like that. He started taking her to these things. Also, she didn't ask him for money, so that was key. He ended up later giving her money, but she did not ask him for money, and that was, Jeremiah said that was the key, don't ask him for money, because I remember I did an interview with Jane Forth, who was another superstar, and she didn't remember anything about being in Women in Revolt, and she is in it, but she said, I was in that? So she didn't remember that, but I said something or other about people trying to get money from Warhol, and she said, she had been working at the factory as a receptionist. She said, I couldn't believe how many people came in there trying to get money from him. So I thought, boy, that's an amazing detail there. So Candy did not ask him, and later he volunteered money to her at different times. He thought, like one point, she came out with him to some concert, and he wrote in his diary, this is on the unpublished diary pages, which I found at the Warhol Museum. Warhol said, the dress was looking really bad. I gave her $50. At that point, $50 was kind of a lot of money. So, he would do that. He genuinely liked her. So, and also, at the end, when, this is in the, Bob Colacello's book, that when Colacello told Warhol, because he refused to go to the hospital, Warhol did not go to hospitals. And he told Warhol that what was wrong, and that she had this cancer, and Colacello said, for the first and only time in all the years I knew him, I saw him cry. So, Warhol, and so it's like a little different picture of Warhol than I usually get or what most people get about him, that there was this other part to him, that he really liked Candy, so, but, and then he ended up using, well, this was Paul Morrissey again, Candy, Jackie, and Holly in Women in Revolt, so. But,
thank you, what a moving story.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to open it up for questions, but I got one thing. You're rattling off this story after story, fabulous story, fabulous story. What surprised you in 10 years?
Well, two things surprised me about the Candy material. First of all, I learned that when she was 18, she lost 10 of her teeth, had 10 of her teeth pulled out, and which made me think, didn't anyone ever take her to a dentist? I mean, what's going on? But okay, 10 teeth came out, and then after that, this became a lifelong problem for her. And like Morrissey said, when he filmed her in Flesh, he had to make sure what angle he was shooting from, so you couldn't tell that he was all on one side, apparently. All these teeth were gone. And then the other surprise was that the person who came forward with Lily Tomlin's girlfriend, later wife, Jane Wagner, paid for Candy to go to her dentist. Said, I'm making an appointment for you at my dentist, and I'm paying for it. And then she got all of those caps, all 10 of them, put in then. And and then there are all these stories about how there was no such thing as dental implants at that point. Right. You could get a cap if you didn't have a tooth there. So, but sometimes they'd fall out. you know, and then later Warhol paid for some dentist stuff too. I mean, so that was a surprise. 10 missing teeth, boy. And then the other thing that surprised me was about her, what I call her spiritual quest. I mean, this is something that she never talked about with people. I mean, Jeremiah knew about it because he had her Mary Baker Eddy book. She got into Christian Science, of all things, you know. But also, I was tracking other things, like one of her friends remembered going to the library for some weird book by an ex-Mormon who had written something, you know. She was following all these sort of esoteric practices because she believed in God. She believed in God, and she'd been raised Catholic, and that wasn't going to work. So she was trying to find another path. And it began with these Hour of Power things that she was listening to back in the 60s. It was all about sort of self-empowerment, and then moving into more metaphysical approach about how you can control your body with your mind, you know, all that kind of thing. And so she ended up at Christian Science, you know. And but that really surprised me, and I think most people don't know about that. So,
thank you. Ladies, gentlemen, everyone else, Cynthia Carr. I'd like to open it up if anyone has any questions or would like to hear more stories or maybe reading something. Who's got a specific anything here? Yes.
Yes. I'm wondering if your feelings about her evolved or changed in the course of learning her story.
I think so. I always start these books thinking, being a little bit perturbed by the person, or you have to get very close to them, or thinking like, how could you do that? Or, you know, things like that. But then you get a deeper sense. I mean, it happened with David too, David Wojnarowicz. Like, David, how could you? You know, and some of the beginning parts. But then I really developed a real affection for David, and I think with Candy too. I mean, she has her moments. I haven't kept out any of the things she did that were not so nice. It's all in here. But I have a great admiration for her in the end, and a really great sympathy for what she went through. And I don't know, I ended up being, you know, really happy to find out all of this stuff about her and write about her. And I started out uncertain, but now I'm not. Now I'm certain. You know, so I think she's, I do think that, you know, she had a lot of great qualities, and she died very young, and I think she would have changed. You know, she wasn't stupid. She would have developed more. I think she would have changed as she went on, and maybe become. I was thinking like she wasn't political, but I think that may have happened also as time went on, and so you know, I don't know. I'm happy with her. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Cindy.
Microphone is coming. There.
So glad, anxiously waiting this book for so long. She's such a meaningful person. But for you as a writer, was there a process of you finding your voice, that how you wanted to write it? Did that take time for you? Or did you find that?
Well, finding a voice, no, but things in here did get moved around. I rewrote the beginning of the first chapter, things like that. But as for finding a voice for it, no, it was pretty much always there. I think it's, and you know, her writing this was really harder than the David book because her stuff was just scattered everywhere. And I have like stacks of books that I looked at, and all these archives I went to, including the Tom Ian archive out in Ohio. And, you know, just to find little pieces of things to put together. And then, like, I'd think later, oh my God, I thought, you know, this thing in this interview, I have to put that in. And I'd already sent in a draft, and I'd have to put it in the next version. So it just, you know, it was a little complicated in that way. Also because a lot of her stuff had no dates attached. You know, I mean, she had notebooks filled with writings, which I'm very grateful for, but mostly a lot of them did not have dates. So I thought, well, when was she thinking about this? You know, so, you know, but that was like, I just had to cope with it. You know, you just have to cope with that. So I figured it out. I would figure out the context and get there. Jackie.
I don't remember if you said it or not. Oh, hi. Did you ever meet Candy?
No. No, I didn't get here till 77. She died in 74. So no,
Wow.
I didn't meet her. No. It's too bad.
Did you, Jackie?
Yeah, sure.
But, could you get on the mic with that, please? Jackie Root.
Yes.
Um,
How did you know her? What did you do?
well, really? Who said that?
It's Veronica said that.
I met Bobby Beers, who was like the first gay man that I ever met in 1967 or 8. And he introduced me to, I mean, he brought me to Max's, he dressed me up, you know, we would go to thrift stores and find the right outfit, spend an entire day figuring it out.
Right.
And then show up in the back room of Max's and you meet everybody back there.
Right.
If you know somebody, they will introduce you. If you don't know somebody, you need to crawl out.
Right, yeah.
Because there's nobody going to look at you. But Candy made her appearances on a regular, I mean, you know, there was a hierarchy around Andy's table in the back left corner.
Right.
And Holly was certainly part of it, and Jackie was certainly part of it. But, you know, Candy had to work her way back there.
Yeah.
So it was just a community.
Right.
And that's how I met her as well.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Cynthia. For me, what I'm most happy about is the fact that you've put Jeremiah in there so much. Because Jeremiah always puts Candy Darling first, and he's done many things, the little book, the Hanneman book, he's done the Beautiful Darling, the diaries, and so much more.
Right.
And he's never a focus. And I think this book will be one of the only focuses where he will show up as much as he does. And he's a lot more important than people really realize. He's a backbone to a lot of people, including myself.
Yeah.
But, so thank you for that.
You're welcome. He's all through the book, pretty much. Yes.
Hi, Cindy. Is there a story about Candy's deathbed picture photographed by Peter Hujar?
Oh, yeah.
Are there any number of stories you might want to share?
There is a story. Candy wanted to be photographed in bed, and she was about to have an operation, and I think was worried about what would happen after and would I still look beautiful and all that stuff. So Jeremiah, on her behalf, called all these photographers who had photographed her before. You know, the whole list of, you know, and there's a long list of photographers, but nobody wanted to come. And then he called Hujar, who had never photographed her, and Hujar said, okay, I'll be right over. And so then he took all those pictures, and she knew the poses she wanted to do and all that. And then the sort of funny thing is that at the end, I think he sent her the contact sheets, and she acted as if she could, like, she was like getting pictures from the drugstore. Like one of the number 3, and I think not realizing exactly who Peter was, and which he didn't do that, but he did the one incredible picture of her on her deathbed there, and and I think a lot of people, it's funny because a number of people have told me, including Holly Woodlawn, said I was there, you know, and you know, I've looked at those contact sheets, and Jackie Curtis was there. He's in some of those pictures on the contact sheets, and then there's a kind of unknown person sitting near the door who must be Jeremiah, you know, but I haven't seen anyone else unless they were standing directly behind Hujar, you know. So yeah, and I mean, somebody even contacted me, like, it was maybe a thing on Facebook. I was her last boyfriend, and and then I tried to get in touch with the guy, and he said, I was there when the picture was taken. And And he ended up kind of blowing me off, and I thought, okay, he's another one of my unreliables. Super unreliable. So, but yeah, that's the story that I have, that why Hujar went, because he was willing to do it. So.
I've got to point out, we've been hearing story after wonderful story, but the photos, there are, what, 30 photos in the book or
I
something?
can't remember the count, it's at least 30. I don't know how many.
There are a lot that I've never seen before. You got any stories about collecting photos?
Those are boring stories about just dealing with all the various people. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's. I'm not sure what I would pick from here. But
Cynthia,
yeah.
did you get to speak to Paul Ambrose very much?
I did talk to Paul Ambrose, thank God.
Because he was on last night on Penny Arcade.
Oh yeah. I did two interviews with Paul Ambrose.
He
Yeah.
talked about Candy last night on the show that I saw.
Oh yeah.
And he talked about that little mermaid in a wheelchair story.
Oh yeah. Well, Paul is, you know, he's another one of my unreliable narrators. All of them so delightful, but you know, a great person. But you know, but yeah,
Not reliable.
but not reliable. So yeah.
Leave some in the back here. Microphone's coming to you.
I'd just like to point out that when Candy and Jeremiah first began to come downtown in the theater, he was as striking as she was. They were incredibly looking before they said a word or made an entrance. They were, you know, the connection was so strong and so valuable. And at Peter's photograph, I visited Candy every week at Cabrini, that she was there towards the end. I wasn't part of the photograph, but that was such a real, truly genuine moment.
It's Jeffrey Nicora
Yes.
speaking.
Yeah, she liked going around. She would refer to Jeremiah sometimes as my husband, you know, and he didn't like that. Since he was gay, and he, you know, don't make me into a straight person or whatever. But you know, she would call him my husband, and she, you know, he was the person that she could rely on. Always
He walked
there.
behind her and was very protective.
Yeah. Protective even after she died, I would say. You know, I have this story at the end of this about how. This is maybe too long a story, but. You know, he went up to visit Candy's mother after she moved upstate, and he wasn't exactly sure why. He got to know the mother and had interviewed her and all that, and like in the early 80s, she invited him upstate to where she was living, and then he wasn't sure why he was going, but the morning after, he was staying overnight, and there was one bus a day. He had to get the bus back, and like a half hour before the bus is coming, she said, okay, she opened the doors of her hutch and said, okay, here's Candy's stuff, take whatever you want, you know, and so he started piling. He only had one little carry-all with him, and she brought out an old suitcase and some shopping bags, and they're like pushing stuff in there. Then they get to the bus, and she takes out the tin with Candy's ashes and gives it to him and says, there's no place for Candy. She's better off with you. I mean, that was, talk about surprises. That's another surprise. Of course, then she tried to get the ashes back in the 90s. She asked for them back. So, and he said, and he lied, which was good. He said, you know, I already buried them with my mother, you know, and he hadn't, but he intended to, and that's where they are now. And Jeremiah will be buried in that same grave. As soon as it's spring and the ground thaws, he will be buried there too. And so, yeah.
Hi, Cindy. I just want to thank you for writing this tremendous book. I'm eager to dive into it. And I want to know, you said this was a 10-year project. So I just wonder what sustained you through all that time. Did you ever feel like it wasn't going to happen, or was there something, you know, that really, you know, held you to it?
I guess, no, I'm just stubborn. I started it, I'm gonna finish it, that's, I mean, I certainly had my moments of you know, I went through lots of different emotions while working on this, but yeah, there was no way I was gonna stop, so. Yeah. Anyway. But,
Are there very many people still alive that knew Candy? That you know of?
a few, but some have even died since I talked to them, like Paul, you know. So yeah, there are a few, like his good friend George Abaniello is still alive, and you know, Augusto Machado is still alive, and they were both important informants for me. So, and there are others. I mean, I'd have to go through my list, but yeah, a lot of important people are just gone. So.
Bob Heidi's still around, right?
Who?
Bob Heidi.
Yeah, yes.
Oh, God,
Yeah. Anyway, there was someone out here.
You were talking about, as a biographer, your job is to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about some of the difficulty with Candy's writing is it wasn't dated. So I'm gonna ask you could you maybe theorize on why you think that maybe she didn't date things? I know as a biographer, your job is to tell the story, but I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on why you think she might have not dated things.
Boy, I don't know. It's I can't even guess about that. About something that she just thought of offhand. She had lots of different notebooks that she would write in all the time, and including like her high school shop notebook. You know, because if you're a boy, you have to take shop. So she was in the shop class, and she had kept that, but then she was writing in all this other stuff later. And I think whatever was at hand, she would just write in it. And sometimes they were dated, but often not. So I can't tell what was in her mind that made her date it or not. No, don't know.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you so much for this beautiful book.
Well,
I'm
thank you.
happy you got to the end of it. And I for you and for Candy. And I'm wondering, this is probably a very obvious question, but did Jeremiah ever get to read the final draft? Did you have a conversation? I don't, you know.
The day that I got the galleys, I took one over to him. And I could tell, you know, and a galley looks, I mean, it had this cover, and it looks like a paperback. It didn't have all the photos in it, but it had the chapters and, you know, the cover. And he was in really bad shape. And I handed him the book, and he said, "What's on the cover?" I thought, uh-oh. Yeah, well, it's in your hand. Somebody was staying with him at the end who told me later that he had read parts of it, at least the beginning chapters were read to him. But I really wanted him to, you know, he was my first person to get a galley. I wanted him to have it immediately, because I'd been visiting him and talking on the phone occasionally. I knew what bad shape he was in. So I got him one.
I think he sounds like an amazing person.
Yeah.
He sounded like an amazing
Yeah.
person. And I can't wait to dive into your book. But I wanted to sort of surmise why maybe Candy didn't put dates all the time, because I think when you're writing, you're not always thinking about posterity, or you're not an Nin who wants everything
Right, yeah.
noted and documented, and
Right.
it's your diary or it's your
Yeah.
notes, and it's not
Yeah.
for anyone to know, perhaps.
Well, it's true, because people, I mean, the things that were the most secret about her were only in the journals. It's like people didn't know about a lot of stuff. It was only in the journals.
Yeah, thank you so much for this book, which I had the privilege to read as galley. But so many people were so awful to her over and over and over again, and I wonder how you felt about the just absolutely relentless transphobia from one end to the other of all but a handful of people around her.
yeah, I mean, she went through hell a lot, and so it was a relief to have someone being kind to her, like Jane Wagner, giving her money for the dentist, you know, and yeah, I mean, she really went through hell, and but sort of, I think, didn't talk about it all that much. It's like, I have an incident in there about the woman that she sees on the street with the baby carriage, and talking about how the baby's beautiful, but maybe kind of look at it, pick it up or whatever, and the woman makes some comment like, I didn't think people like you cared about babies, or something like that, and Jeremiah was shocked, you know, he didn't, and she said to him, this happens to me all the time, you know, it's like, he didn't know, and he was sort of like, maybe her closest friend, and he didn't know it. It's like she went through stuff like that all the time. And yeah, really, I put in, you know, things like that I found, and it always has to go in there, the way she was treated. And yeah, so it's, you know, it's disgusting. I mean, it's very sad. I just had a lot of sad feelings about things like that. It's horrible. I mean, it's a reason that I wrote this. I want people to know that this stuff happened, you know, so.
And still happens.
Yes, and yeah, even more now, when transgender people have become political footballs. So, you know, we have all this legislation happening in almost half the states in the country. It's like 23, 24 states trying to pass anti-trans legislation. And, you know, it's really alarming and appalling, so. Anyway.
That kind of hatred, that kind of disgust is still prevalent. In the 90s, I was on the Phil Donahue show, and I was talking about my daughter, who's long lost to me, and is in the Church of Scientology. She was born into it, and I was talking about her, and a woman in the audience stood up, her red-faced, pointing at me, how dare you bring a child into this world knowing what you are? And I didn't have an answer for that. I don't to this day. But 5 minutes later, Phil Donahue was walking through the audience as he did, and he dropped the microphone on her head.
Okay, that's a good response. Oh boy.
Any last couple of questions, and then we'll get to book signing, book buying. Buy lots of books.
One last question over here.
Oh, Holly.
I don't have a question, but I'm gonna stand up. But I just wanna say, like, this is like such a historic moment to see the two of you in conversation, to people I adore, but are heroes of cultural life of New York City, but also of this country, and of queerness, and it's so wonderful to see you here, a historic moment, it will be as historic as some of the things that you recount in this book. People will be reflecting on this moment, and thank you both for persevering in the work you've done.
Here's here.
Thank you.